For all the talk of journalism being such a dangerous job under constant threat from Trump and his red hat Stasi during his presidency and campaign, those supposed threats never really materialized, at least beyond the heckling that was common at their events.
And as you can hear behind me, Wolf, the crowd is very fired up. We have about a couple thousand people in this room so far. They are letting the press corps here know exactly how they feel about what we're doing here, Wolf.
Such trauma was later recounted by Jim Acosta as a constant barrage of death threats that had him contemplating whether to wear body armor, but exposure to that danger was what he was willing to endure to tell the truth to America, he wrote in his memoir. Now, of course, many might dispute the true extent of that danger, but even Acosta himself would have to admit in retrospect, he was writing and worried about what could happen, not what did. It was concern for a world where journalists could be physically attacked by politicians and their henchmen, and perhaps a nice book advance that motivated Acosta and his media defenders to state the threat against him in as heightened terms as possible. It was a warning for the future, not an actuality in the present. But if the principles at stake in that alarmism were actually sincere, you would think this current story would be something of a bigger one if we're so concerned about a world where journalists get murdered for challenging political power. We don't have to warn about some dystopian future. We can examine that story today in Las Vegas, where a journalist was actually murdered for challenging political power. Or at least that is what it looks like. The incident remains under investigation, but on Wednesday, Clark County Public Administrator Robert Tellis was arrested on a murder charge in the stabbing death of Las Vegas Review-Journal investigative reporter Jeff Gehrman last weekend. This in apparent retribution for Gehrman sinking Tellis's tenure in the office through a series of critical reports in the spring and early summer. Robert Tellis is a 45-year-old newcomer to that office in Las Vegas. He's a lawyer and a Democrat, first elected as Clark County Public Administrator in 2018, currently near the end of his 4-year term. His office manages the property of people who die and have no immediately known relatives to handle it. Earlier this year, Tellis's office became turbulent with accusations of an inappropriate relationship with a female staffer under his management, Roberta Lee Kennett. Both Tellis and Kennett were married, but office staff observed them spending an unusual amount of private time together, and Kennett assumed authority, power, and privileges around the office. Her peers believed that to be because of her personal relationship with Tellis, and so resentment grew within the staff. And that resentment ultimately became a political challenge. Tellis's assistant public administrator, Rita Reed, a fellow Democrat, launched a primary challenge against Tellis to remove the office from his control through June's election. Enter the journalist who broke that entire story to the public. Jeff Gehrman was a 69-year-old veteran investigative reporter at the Las Vegas Review-Journal. He started writing about this story in May and was provided not just with the testimony of a half-dozen office staff about the state of office conflict and dysfunction, but with video the employees had recorded of Tellis and his office mistress Kennett in one of their apparently frequent backseat work meetings in her car in the parking garage outside the office. The video isn't exactly clear. It's poorly lit and taken from far away, but you can see two people inside the car enjoying each other's company. And besides, there's no doubt about the identities anyway. Tellis acknowledges it is him and Kennett. He says their time was merely talk, though, just a therapy session about problems in the office that concluded with a friendly hug. He was just trying to get things off his chest with someone who understands, Tellis insisted, or just trying to get things off in general. But whatever the case, Gehrman published that story and that video on May 16th. Gehrman then published a second story 10 days later detailing how the county had hired a former county coroner as a third party to help oversee the office amid the controversy. And then 3 weeks later, the controversy proved politically fatal for Tellis. He lost the Clark County Democratic primary for the office to his challenger, Assistant Public Administrator Rita Reed, meaning Tellis would be out of office in January. Tellis then posted a long letter on his campaign website blaming the reporter Gehrman and his right-wing publication, the Las Vegas Review-Journal, for apparently assisting his challenger Reed in turning Democratic voters against him. And Tellis also tweeted about Gehrman specifically, accusing Gehrman of writing smear pieces. Gehrman did publish 2 more stories, one about Tellis's letter in response to losing the race, and one about Tellis's formal concession. Tellis said Gehrman was mad that he hadn't crawled into a hole and died yet. That's a horribly ironic tweet because Tellis apparently did spend the next 2 months in a hole, plotting how Gehrman would die. In retribution for what he viewed as a hit piece, Tellis became a hit man and stabbed that reporter to death at his home. It happened last Friday, September 2nd, at about 11 a.m. Exactly how it happened is still unclear and under investigation, but Tellis went to Gehrman's home, stabbed him multiple times, and left him to die somewhere outside in the yard. Tellis walked away from the scene in an orange jacket and a giant straw hat captured on neighborhood surveillance cameras on his way to and from the scene. A strangely elaborate outfit to conceal his identity, but stranger still, Tellis apparently didn't bother getting rid of it. Police searched his home on Wednesday and found, among other evidence, the cut-up hat and a cut-up pair of shoes matching those worn by the man on camera. Why bother cutting up the evidence if you aren't going to get rid of the evidence? I have no idea. He had several days to do that, but didn't. I guess Thursday must be garbage day or something. But regardless, it's not the funny hat that's conclusively incriminating for Tellis. It's DNA. Tellis's DNA was found on Gehrman's body, including under his fingernails due to the struggle in the murder. But before his DNA was matched, Tellis was actually released by police from questioning, briefly returning to his home in a similar getup, what was described as a white hazmat suit because his clothing had been collected as evidence. He refused to speak with reporters outside on return. Police arrived a few hours later after the DNA match to arrest Tellis, but Tellis barricaded himself inside his home and apparently harmed himself before police could get him out. Some sort of superficial wounds and perhaps some pill swallowing. Tellis visited the hospital, but he's apparently fine. But for the murder charge he's now facing, denied bail by the judge at Thursday's court hearing. Tellis will formally face that murder charge in court on Wednesday. What sentence he potentially faces remains to be seen, but of course, there is still the awkward matter that he remains an elected public official currently holding office and collecting the $120,000 salary that office pays. And as a legal matter, Clark County officials are unsure and unclear what to do about that. He can only be removed from office through death, resignation, or a voter-initiated recall. The county can order his employees not to report to him, and they have. Obviously, from jail, he won't be conducting his official duties anyhow, and this is all moot come January when he's out of office by election anyway. But the fact remains, Las Vegas taxpayers are paying him a six-figure salary to rot in the prison that they also provide. But hey, a government check to sit in a jail cell sounds exactly like the progressive utopia of the future. So congrats to Tellis on achieving the dream, I suppose. But as you'd expect, for the progressive ends he's achieved, the progressive scrutiny he'll avoid. In much of the news coverage, this is simply a local event, and the politics of it are only a minor detail at best, totally absent at worst. In fact, ABC, CBS, NBC, and MSNBC all omitted Tellis's party affiliation in their reporting. He's just a local politician who lost a primary earlier in the year. Well, which primary did he lose? And why did he lose it? Was it because of critical news coverage that we're supposed to defend vigilantly on principle otherwise? But of course, that principle is no principle at all. It's just another weapon with which we can get the ultimate villain in this story and every other one, no matter how tortured the logic to do it. The only way that threats against journalists are actually bad, including in this case that wasn't just a threat, but was a fully realized, politically motivated murder, is if somehow, some way, we can blame Trump for it. And so, of course, a deranged local reporter had to try it. On Thursday, the sheriff held a press conference to explain the investigation and the evidence, and a writer at the Nevada Current asked the sheriff if he disavows Trump's history of normalization of violence against journalists.
Now is probably not the appropriate time to talk politics, but do you condemn...
So why are we talking politics then?
Do you condemn former President Trump's normalization of violence against journalists?
No, I think this is probably the inappropriate venue to speculate on that or opine on that.
That reporter then tweeted that the sheriff's refusal to disavow Trump was the press conference's primary takeaway, and included that claim as a feature piece of her article. So even when a journalist does get actually murdered, that story is still secondary to Trump saying something mean 2 years ago, which is what this reporter referenced as evidence for her premise. Trump in 2020 mocking rioters in Minneapolis for claiming to be journalists while they were confronted and detained by police and National Guard. It's quite a stretch to say that anybody would be motivated to attack a journalist at his home because of Trump mocking riotous behavior on the streets 2 years ago. But it's an even more preposterous stretch to imply that Trump motivated a Democrat politician to do it. Robert Tellis is apparently a big Elizabeth Warren fan, attending her CNN town hall in 2020 and praising her as the best candidate to be the next president. So it'd be much more sensible to blame her violent rhetoric for inspiring this attack.
I am angry, and we are gonna fight back.
Or to blame CNN for normalizing hostile confrontation at private homes.
We found his house behind a large gate and tried making contact through the security access pad.
Do you feel responsible for people who didn't get vaccinated, possibly got sick and died because of what you told them about the vaccines?
Now, of course, I'm not doing that. I'm just saying it's bizarre to imply that there's some responsibility for this murder higher than the responsibility of the murderer himself, who responded to the journalistic challenge of political power and the will of the people with lethal violence. That is everything we've been warned about for years, now fully realized. But instead of the same warnings of the rising tide of fascism, we'll just get a couple days of incomplete throwaway coverage, omitting key details in conclusive demonstration that nobody is actually serious about the principles at stake at all. Like everything else, those supposed principles are merely weapons with which to browbeat political opposition. So as long as we're excusing the killer, fine, I'll go. At least he had the courtesy to actually put on the disguise. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Parler, that is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.